Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, I interviewed a husband and wife couple who are believers in sacred geometry. Not only do they believe in sacred geometry, but they've written a book about it. It's called Sacred Geometry, the Universal Language of Divine Alignment. They are Gregory and Gail Hoag, and here's my interview with the Hoags. Gregory and Gail Hoag, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Gregory, I'm going to start with you. Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, I've been working with sacred geometry for over 40 years. And what started me on this journey was in the late 70s, I built a pyramid that cost about $250,000 in today's dollars. And I was sleeping in it, and it set off my Kundalini, which started connecting me to higher dimensional realities. And then I started seeing all these geometries that exist prior to physical matter being formed. So I built what I saw, and what happened is people started feeling the energy from it. So that began my journey. And then Gail came in to my life in 1985, and I'll let her tell her part of this story.
Okay, Gail, feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm Gail Hoag, and Gregory and I met in 1985 in a very serendipitous way. And one of the things that I realized when I met him is my intuition told me right then that we had work to do. Well, that started us on a very, very wonderful life journey. And sacred geometry was actually at the core of it, because he was carrying around this box of these different structures that he had made, and they had tetrahedrons on them. A tetrahedron is a three-sided triangle. And I had been studying the work of Buckminster Fuller, who worked a lot with the tetrahedron. So that kind of inspired our relationship to help him understand what Buckminster Fuller was all about, and my understanding what he was doing. I always really cared about making a difference in the world. And it made sense to me that getting information and tools that are based on sacred geometry could really support people in their journey in raising their consciousness, being more present, and able to have a life that's more purposeful and more fulfilling.
I'm going to go back to Gregory for this one. What is sacred geometry and how does it work?
Okay. Well, we've just finished a whole book on that subject, and we can talk about that later. But sacred geometry is describing how everything in universe is made, how it exists. You see, 99.9999% of everything is pure energy. And as that energy comes into physical matter, it takes on certain patterns and rhythms and cycles. And by looking at how universe creates all these patterns, rhythms, and cycles, we can start to bring them into our life. And as many of the ancients did when they built Stonehenge, and they built the pyramids, and they built cathedrals, and all of these different structures followed very particular natural patterns that were found everywhere in our reality. And by bringing them into a structure, you could start to have that vibration go on at a level where you could find your own vibration was raised. And so that's what sacred geometry is about. It's that aspect of geometry that moves energy from the level of of the divine, the higher dimensional levels, into the physical dimension. And so this is what we've been studying and working with for over 40 years, and building tools that reflect how universe does it, how nature does it. And then when we bring that into our lives and wear it as a pendant or put it in a room where we're sitting, we can feel the energy because it's so pure in the way it connects with the divine archetype that created the moon, the sun, the earth, everything. Does that make sense? Or you
Yes,
want?
it does. And I will go to
Good.
Gail for the next question without spoiling too much of the book you and Gregory wrote, Sacred Geometry, the Universal Language of Divine Alignment. What is that book about?
Well, Gregory was just beginning to tell you a little bit about it. We actually start out the book, Aaron, talking about consciousness and looking at what is consciousness, how do we really relate to a universe that is conscious. Something that we talk about in the book is that because everything goes from like just raw energy into form, there's something that is creating that. And we're not getting into anything like religious, but it is a spiritual connection where there's something that brings it all together. There's rhythm and pattern and cycle and all kinds of things that show us that there's intelligence, there's consciousness, there's love that brings all of this together. Well, we live in a world right now where many of us feel very alone, very separated. And what we're showing in our book is that everything is really connected. Everything is there in a way that when we understand, when we're in sync with those patterns and the sense of what life is really about, then our lives work much better. And that I think is a really important part. So we start out talking about consciousness, and then we talk about what actually detracts from consciousness, what blocks it. And we then identify that when we're not connected to that intrinsic energy, that's where those blockages affect our health, our well-being, our prosperity, our relationships, all those things. So we flesh that out, and then we start moving into numbers and how numbers express an understanding of geometry and how life is created in a very, very interesting way. So again, it really helps us find our place in all of our lives, all of what is.
Either of you can answer this next question. Which part of the book did each of you write?
That was a really wonderful experiment because we wrote it together. She would write something, I would write something. We correct each other's work. And that in itself was a wonderful expression of how two people could start to meld together. So actually, we did a workshop together, and then I started toward the latter part of the book, the numbers, I started writing that part more, and then Gail would correct it and help make it more readable and sensible. And we go back and forth throughout the whole thing so that Gail would come in and keep me from getting too dry and too out there and too strange and woo-woo, and bring it down and ground it. So it was a wonderful experiment for sharing.
And what's actually fun about all of it, as we got the book and I was flipping through it and I was going, did I write that? Or did Gregory write that? Because we had really interacted so much during this process. And, we've been together now for 38 years. So we know each other very, very well. And sometimes it's a little hard to know whose ideas come from who. But Gregory is really the mathematician. He's got the scientific mind that I don't have. But I have a way of then being able to take some of that and make it more lucid, more clear for people to understand. So it's really a very good partnership that way.
Okay. Gail, I'm going to go to this one. What are some universal principles and archetypes you both talk about in the book?
Well, when you see the book and, visually, we've got like 72 visual images so that as we're talking about how these things work, we're actually showing people how nature is the creative force, how things really work, where you can discover things over and over again. So there's correlation, there's the patterns that we talk about. So the archetypes are really like the structure that show us the principles of creation, and that rules our lives as well. So that, to me, is something really important, to find a place where we are belonging, where we're understanding the unity of who we are. The ancients understood this. That's how they constructed some of the amazing temples that we see, from whether you're looking at cathedrals or pyramids or ancient structures like Stonehenge. There's something there that they knew they were building to support a connection for people to feel what it takes to go beyond their every moment life. I believe that we are multidimensional beings. And what that means is that what we see, feel, hear, touch in the physical realm is really just a small part of who we are. And when we start reaching for the higher aspects of who we are, that's where things really start to give us a sense of what our capabilities are, how we're related, how we can understand universe in a very different way.
And what I wanted to point out is I have slides from images that were in the book. And for example, these are the Platonic solids. And you can see how the number of degrees in each one is a multiple of the tetrahedron, 720. That becomes an archetype in the way so many things in the universe are built. And when we take these Platonic solids and we add the degrees together as the top layer, what happens is that equals the diameter of the sun. The next group of Platonic solids, a tetrahedron, octahedron, so forth, equals the diameter of the earth. And the cube is the diameter of the moon. Exactly. So these are divine archetypes, the way these geometries work to define the diameter of things that we understand that are around us. We're walking on the earth, the moon revolves around the earth, and the way they're structured follows these patterns that show up everywhere in our universe. And when we go to combining some of the things like the diameter of the moon with the diameter of the earth, we end up with this geometry to the right. And so you see the things that are all around us, like the moon and the earth together, create a geometry. And this is an archetype because it always works. And then we can bring that energy, that geometry, into our life, and it's resonating with the same principles that the moon and the earth are resonating with. Plus, together, they work with a certain geometry that is known as the phi ratio, which determines how so many things in nature are created. Like all these spirals of a seashell, the galaxy itself, to a sliced cabbage and a sunflower, this is the way the human being is constructed. Right down to our DNA, it follows these same patterns. So our DNA, our body, and all of these different plants are following a particular pattern or archetype. And so that's what we mean by the universal pattern that exists, and then everything alive follows that pattern, from plants, animals, insects, human beings, bacteria, DNA. And so it's an amazing thing when you start looking at how everything is so interconnected by these patterns of creation.
Okay, I have time for three more questions, and I'll go to Gail for this one. Is the Sacred Geometry book self-published, traditionally published, or hybrid published?
We worked with a publisher called Hybrid Global. So yes, it's a hybrid model. And so one of the things that we're more responsible for, as you may know, is our publicity, getting it out there in the world. Our editor came from through our publisher. She has supported us in a lot of the nuts and bolts of getting the book written and helping us to go through all of the different hoops that you have to go through in writing a book. And it was extremely helpful.
And this is the cover of the book, Sacred Geometry, the Universal Language of Divine Alignment. And if people go to I connect the number 2 and then all.com/chapter, they can receive a free chapter from the book and more information about what it's about and all the reviews that came from different authors, telling how much they really enjoyed it and appreciated it.
Okay, Gregory, I'm going to go to you for this next question, and I will note that relevant links will be included in the text description of the episode once it's uploaded. What are some sacred geometry tools, jewelry, and other items that are made by you that are available to purchase, and where can they be bought?
Okay, that same email address that was there for the book, the first part, the website, iconnecttoall.com. And let me show you some of the different things we have in that we've been making. For example, this is the front side and the back side. So this is one pendant where we're seeing two sides. And inside the pendant, we have 35 antenna systems that are aligned with the way the sun, moon, and stars have been created. And it works with geometry on the surface and inside as well, where it starts aligning people with their higher self. It starts allowing people to feel actually happy and good and connected to everything around them without being overwhelmed. It keeps them in their own integrity. So people that are empathic find that this is really wonderful to help them stay focused and contained. And things will happen when people put this on, like one older couple in their early 80s, after buying it, came back to buy something else a couple weeks later, excuse me, and he leaned over and said to me, "What I love about the pendant is my wife doesn't yell at me as much anymore." And she overheard us and said, I don't have to. And it's like they both change their realities because of working with that higher energy. And we have people like one person who worked as a 911 operator, and that can be a very stressful job. And he found that he became more telepathic, stress didn't bother him as much. He was able to be in a better relationship with his partner. All kinds of shifts started happening in his emotional body just because of working with this geometry and as a pendant. And then we also have, let's see, all types of geometries that we build, like what you're seeing now, and what's behind me here in our studio, where these geometries, when they're spinning, when they're moving, they're projecting an energy field that shifts our energy field because we're so separated from what goes on in reality now because of all the toxins in the environment, the EMFs, all the things going on with the fear in the world, the things going on with our belief systems and judgments. And, all of these things block connection to our higher self. And even our negative emotions keep out the love and joy. And so what happens with one of these tools, like the pendant, when a person is wearing that, I can muscle test them, and we see that if they think of something negative that makes them unhappy, when they have the pendant on, it no longer blocks them from that love of higher self.
Gail, you're going to get the last question. What is your work as an artist who creates paintings like, and is there a connection between your paintings and spiritual geometry?
That's an interesting question. My paintings were really about understanding light and color, and I wanted to understand the universe. I wanted to be able to create something that would affect people in a positive way so that when they would stand in front of my paintings, they would feel that relationship, they would feel that connection. So even though that's where I started many years ago, I feel like this work has just been the perfect next level for people to have these tools on their body, in their home, so that they can really feel that connection to universe, that understanding of love that can drive their life in a positive way. So very much in alignment from where I was when I first started as an artist.
Gregory and Gail, you both were fascinating guests, and I thank you both for appearing on Apollo Papyrus.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron.
Yes, Aaron.
As this is an audio-only podcast, I apologize to our listeners for not having any sacred geometry visuals to display, but Gregory and Gail were wonderful guests. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@Apollo Papyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.